So Senate Government Operations, it is Tuesday, February 23rd, and we are looking at a couple issues today, and our schedule looks a little wonky, but it has to do with the availability of our legislative council. So at 1:30, we're going to kind of look through the Cannabis Bill, which is S25, and we do not have that bill in our committee. It's in Judiciary. It got sent there, but there are some parts of it that they have asked us to look at. Then at 2:00, we'll vote on S15, which is the Elections Bill. And then at 2:15, we'll go back to cannabis, because that 2:00 was the only time Ameren had to be able to meet with us around the Elections Bill. And then at 3:00, we'll go to the Municipal Self-Governance Bill. Does that make sense?
Indeed.
Okay. All right. So let us, Tucker, do you want to, Michelle walked us through the Cannabis Bill a little bit. And one of our main concern, I believe, is around the vote that has to take place. But if there are other issues in here that either VLCT or UC that deal with municipalities. And then we have an amendment by Senator Rahm that we'll be looking at. She presented it to Judiciary, but they asked us to also take a look at it. And then in our next iteration of this on Thursday, we will look at, just to run it by this committee, it'll go to finance, but it's a bill on municipal share in the revenue generated by the new industry. But that bill is just being put on the floor tomorrow, I believe. So any questions so far where we are? Okay. Yes. Yes.
Senator White, I would
Yes.
just like to say last night in the Hartford town meeting, informational meeting, the issue, and you'll be pleased to know who brought it up, is Michael Hoyt, who's a candidate for the select board, raised the frustration of municipalities not being able to benefit at all from the sale of cannabis in their towns.
Well, I think that the answer to that is that they need to get to their House members.
I would agree.
But we will get there.
Anyway, he could have dedicated that moment to you.
All right. So Gwen, Tucker, do you want to, first of all, are there other issues in here in the municipal, in the bill that the municipalities would like us to address, or that Tucker, you have some concerns about? I will go first to Gwen, I guess.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is Gwen Zach on VLCT. So it's been a few weeks since I testified on this, I believe. So I think the issues we brought up still stand, that we the two issues that are of concern for us are obviously the mandate to have a vote by a date certain. That's just right around the corner. And we oppose that. And we also have concerns with the language that towns have to vote on for ballot initiative, like for the language that they'd be mandated to use on a ballot for opting in. So I don't know if you want me to go into more details about why we oppose those two things. I'd be happy to, or just let it stand as is.
Can I ask a question? First, are you opposed to the idea that towns have to have a vote by a date certain? Because that's the way we did it with alcohol. Or are you opposed to the date that's listed in here?
Both. But I think the reality is, and this is kind of how we're looking at it, is that we don't know what the rules and regulations are going to look like right now, right? So we have a very, very basic understanding of what towns and cities can do and then what rules they'll have to abide by once rules are set up at state level. And so towns are feeling like they can't make educated decisions and opt-in votes if they're forced to by a date certain. Even at a date in 2022 seems pretty quick. So that's one concern. The other concern is that, the amount of licenses that would be going out for actual retail establishments. If you look at other states and how many retail establishments they have in certain regions, it's not huge, especially the highly regulated ones. Like Massachusetts would be a good one to look at, where you're not seeing a cannabis establishment in every town, nor every city. And so I think if you look at the reality of where retail establishments will most likely be operating, you're looking at more urban areas. I think we can all guess, Bennington, Brattleboro, maybe Barry, Montpelier, Burlington area, if you have more, probably in Chittenden County and elsewhere. So we have those ones that, are the obvious contenders. The interesting thing that's happening is that we're getting a lot of calls from smaller communities, not really small communities, but we're also getting calls from really small communities that are asking things like, hey, is there a possibility that we can do cannabis in our general store? We only have a general store. And our response is, we don't know. We don't know what the state rules are going to look like. We don't know how they're going to divvy things up. We don't know if it's going to look like a Department of Liquor kind of structure, or if they're going to allow for incorporation of different things in an operation. So we just don't know. So I would tell those communities that would be less likely to host operations if those sorts of mom and pop smaller operations weren't going to be located there, to hold off. To hold off until you figure out what the rules promulgated will look like. And so, the Middleburys, the Burlingtons, the Brattleboro's, all of those that want to get ahead of the game, that have more professionalized staff to update their zoning, get their ordinances in order, figure out how they want to set up their local cannabis control board, by all means, they are doing it, and they're going to continue to do it. And just the natural timing of things and how the state's going to be, issuing their licenses after they go through the application processes, we're looking at months, if not years, before things start get rolling. So I feel like even picking a date certain, even if we're rolling into 2023 or 2024, it's so artificial, and it's not necessarily beneficial, because we're already seeing about 20 to 30, probably even more, because a lot of towns are now delaying their town votes until May. So, and as you know, the vote has to be done by Australian ballot. So these are very straightforward votes, and they don't have a lot of time to A, figure out what's up and down right now, and B, educate their voters, and C, we're already having confusion over what kind of operations would be allowed in certain communities. We were listening into the conversations in House Judiciary last week on this bill, and the conversations about integrated licenses, which I found fascinating, because how the conversations were going in that committee were actually diametrically opposed to the legal opinions we've been giving our communities since September, as we've interpreted S54. So that leads me into my second issue, which is the language that's being specified for the opt-in ballot measures.
I think we've already decided that language is not
perfect.
appropriate.
Okay, great. That's wonderful, because what we wanted just to say on record is that, if there was any language, just make it really simple, because local communities are not concerned about licenses. They're just considered about the type of operations that are going to be operating. The state's they can call whatever license, whatever they want to call it.
Right.
But at the local level, all they really have control over is retail. So just leave it at that.
Yeah.
Do you want to host retail? Great. And if you're one of those 5 communities that has a dispensary that might have integrated licenses to be issued, it's already rolled into that. That's at least our opinion, is that it would already be rolled into it, because you would have your retail license to go, and they've already voted on, yes, we want retail, or no, we don't want retail. So I think that covers our concerns. And I'd be happy to answer any questions.
So just in terms of, I'm going to weigh in here just because I spent a lot of time on this bill, as you probably all know. And the concern is that if there isn't a date certain, retailers won't have any idea where they can set up a retail shop. They won't know if they can set one up in Putney if Putney never has a vote. And so that impedes their ability to do business. And I don't know why for a small town they would hold off, because if they voted yes, if they vote no, then it's just over. If they vote yes and they only have a general store, they still may not be able to set one up there. And that's going to be the business plan of the retailer, not the town. If it says that they have to have a closed off section, and I don't remember that this is in S54. I know we talked about it, but there can't be anyone under 21 allowed into the retail section. So they would, if they just have a general store, they'd have to have a whole separate section over there that did that. And that would be the business plan of the retailer to say, well, I sure can't make a living in this little town, in this general store. So they're not going to do it. But I don't see that holding off until you get all the rules is, because the rules are going to apply mainly to the retailer and their business plan. But those are the reasons that we put a date certain, and the date certain might not be the right one at this point. They will start taking applications in January of 2022 if we stay on schedule. And there will be no proposals before April 1st. Anyway. So Tucker. Oh, and then Senator Colomar. Mm-hmm.
One of the questions that I have had since this language started being discussed in your committee, and as this has been moved back and forth, is whether this ballot question can be raised by petition, because this language is addressing the issue of prohibition by omission. The legislative body never puts it on the ballot, therefore it's prohibited in the municipality. The legislative body has a tool to prevent cannabis retail establishments from ever operating in the town, right? But the language does not limit this to a proposal from the legislative body. It states that the municipality has to vote, which means a town-wide vote.
Right.
My question is, can the voters petition at any time and push the select board to put this on the ballot?
I would say yes.
Yeah, that's been our legal opinion through the league, is that whenever there's even if it's not specified in statute, if there is a voter, a power that's given to voters, right? And it doesn't necessarily enumerate that it has to be done in a certain manner, that overall petition authority is automatically applicable. So just assume, if it's silent in the law, that if you get the proper amount of signatures, you have to get it on the ballot. So that's been our opinion since day one.
Senator Colomar, did you have?
I did, and thank you, Madam Chair. So Gwen, I'm just curious whether the league has any issue or concern about, on page 3, line 4, in essence, it says a rescission of the permission to operate shall not apply to someone that's already operating, basically. So in other words, a community would vote to go ahead with a retail operation. Someone would open up, and then at some point down the road, I don't know how quickly or long it would take, there might be considerable pushback that says, geez, maybe this wasn't such a good idea. We should take another vote, and they do, and they vote not to have it anymore. But that particular business seems to be exempt and could continue to operate forever. Is that
right,
an
so this is
Yes.
That's in S54. I mean, so there's that grandfathering provision, which also is kind of why we're telling towns, like, if you don't get a petition and you're really uncertain about it and your community is having really like, robust conversations, hold it off and either, to next year, maybe if you really want to deal with it this year, maybe do, warn a special meeting. That's not that difficult to do. There's ways of going about it, but if you don't know what's coming down your way and you can't make an educated guess, if there's a license that, if the state issues a license, they've issued the license, you're now, they're now going to be able to be, in your community if you've had that vote. If you, I mean, I guess there might be a way to not get it if you at the local level, when you have the local cannabis control board issuing their local permitting, but even then you're going by the state regulation. So who knows what those laws, what those rules will say in terms of what powers the local control board will have. So we're just assuming, better be safe than sorry if you really do have concerns. Because again, I said this a couple weeks ago, there are communities that are throwing caution to the wind and are saying, we don't care what the repercussions are, positive, negative, in between, we're ready to go. We just think that this is an issue that we're willing to deal with. And there's a lot that are on the opposite side of the spectrum. And there's a whole ton of towns and cities that are right in the middle that are trying to figure out what's up and what down. And when you have the grandfathering provision, which we don't have a problem with that, which makes sense. It's not fair to an applicant to say, here, here's your license. And then, then you take it back from them. But at the same time, you have to give local communities the ability to make educated decisions for themselves. Otherwise, why give them the decision anyways? Because it's under duress and without information.
So I think that there's a lot of the same kind of fear that we saw here when we passed the dispensary bill, that there's going to be massive crime around the retail stores and there's going to be kids laying in the streets. And I think that there's a lot of fear around this. And as with liquor licenses, the towns have the ability to not issue a liquor license if there has been a lot of fighting or a lot of selling to underage kids or things like that. And the same thing would be true here. It isn't that there are issues, they have to abide by certain rules. And those, so if they find out that the retailer is letting in kids and is somehow finding products that are appealing to kids or that are not allowed under the marketing, under the scheme in Vermont, and they're doing that, that's illegal. So they could be shut down then. So, but I don't know, other than those kinds of things, I don't know what the repercussions.
Well, I think a lot of the repercussions are that there's no guaranteed source of local taxes, and that's a bigger concern for municipal officials, less so maybe for the public, because they're the ones that are having to deal with the local impacts. I think, and this is just my own personal opinion, is that like I live in Brookfield, Randolph is having very robust conversations on our front porch forum about this. And 9 times out of 10, it's about the impacts on the, youth community and youth access and those sorts of things. And I'm sure there's other issues out there that people are concerned about, the ones that you mentioned included. But I think the bigger thing here is that this is an opportunity for public education and for public outreach and for public knowledge. And one of the biggest frustrating things that we have on our end is when we are asking, when locals are talking to their select boards or city councils, and then the city councils are asking us or their town and city attorneys, what's going on? And our answer is, that's our answer. We don't know. And that's part of the problem, is that we just don't have the information to give them to make them feel okay, to make them feel like they're making the right decision or an educated decision at a very minimum. So I don't know, again, I don't know what the answer is here. I think that a mandate is I don't know why expediting a date certain would be a good thing necessarily if we're already having, let's say, even half of the towns that are having it go out to ballot this town meeting are in the affirmative. Let's just assume, 15 towns approve it. That's 15 towns. That's a lot of towns. You look at how many licenses are in Massachusetts. That's like on par or above pace of what they have. So if you are adding more to that, it's at least done in a way where it's measured and it's happening organically. And it doesn't matter what kind of things going on in a local community, they're always looking at their neighbors and borrowing from what they're doing. So they're going to learn if, Middlebury approves it, which we, are almost 100% sure is going to happen. They're going to have other communities near Addison County saying, okay, like what are they doing in their zoning? What are they doing in their local conversations? What kind of, public hearings are they doing? What kind of informational pamphlets are they issuing? So I think it happens organically. So I think the mandate for a date certain just doesn't make sense. And if you were absolutely, steadfast in having one and putting one in statute, 2023 seems the earliest that makes sense, because 2022 is when things really start rocking and rolling, and the rules will be known, and the first communities will be getting those, applications for licensure after this year's, pool of towns vote to opt in. And it'll happen in a manner where within, 3 years, even thereafter, you'll know what's going on in communities. We'll know what the landscape looks like.
So I'm going to call on Senator Clarkson in just 1 second here, but I want to say that this mandated drop dead date was a compromise for opt out, because originally the Senate wanted opt out and the league opposed opt out, and the House went with the league's position of opt in. This was a compromise, and I don't think it would, allowing it to just be an opt-in forever and ever and ever, I don't think we'll pass the Senate Judiciary Committee. I wouldn't support it. The other thing is that just because a town votes opts in does not mean that they'll ever have a store there. Because if the town of Dummerston opts in, my guess is nobody's going to set up a retail shop in Dummerston, because there's no Dummerston Center. There's no retail kind of space in Dummerston. So just because they opt in does not mean they'll have anybody there. You are on mute, and then I'm going to.
Yes. I would just flip that then and say, well, if you're very certain Dummerston's not going to host, then why make them vote in the first place? It seems to me that
because at some point somebody some enterprising person may decide that putting one at the Sunoco station makes sense, and they should have the right to do that if they can prove their business plan and get a license. But anyway, it's and I don't know what all those towns are that may or may not have one. So, Senator Clarkson?
Yeah, I have to agree with Gwen. I think this is the cart before the horse. I mean, we have so many unknowns about this, about how this is going to, and I don't think it's certain that this session will end without towns maybe having a recourse on income and revenue from a tax of some variety. And that would affect, and that would have a huge impact on a vote. So I think the vote is the cart before the horse. Too many unknowns are still unsettled until you don't want to vote on something until you know fully what it looks like. And so I would agree with the league on this one. I would get rid of a mandated time, and I'd also love to have us, I don't know whose job it is to revisit the town's ability to add a sales tax on this, but is it finance that would do that?
We do not want to have the towns add a sales tax on this. That would be completely contrary to.
So however the municipality could benefit needs to be addressed in some fashion here.
That's the bill that I have.
Right. And who's taking that up?
Well, finance will, because it's a tax.
Okay. Okay. And is that being taken up in conjunction with our work on this S-25?
No,
Could they attach it to S-25?
if they wanted to, they can, I suppose. Yeah,
Okay.
okay.
But
So,
on the date,
um,
on the voting date, I think this is putting the cart before the horse.
All right, the option is to have an opt-out. To have towns opt out. So the presumption would be that if they don't vote to opt out, they are in. Anyway, we have Ameren with us for just a few minutes, I believe. Is that true, Ameren?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that? I had taken off my headset for a moment.
I think we have you for just a few minutes.
My last business was running ahead of schedule, so you have me for more than a few minutes.
Oh, how
So-
exciting.
I am gonna suggest though, so that we can get this done before we lose you, that we go to S15 and do a vote on that. So if you want to, it was posted, the final document, and I think there were just a few changes that we had talked about. One was, there were some technical changes, and then the major change, I think, if I'm right, was the addition of the report to come back around translation services.
Yes, that
Right.
was the one added section.
So, committee, where are we then with this bill, S15? And I do apologize, and I sent it out right away because I said S51. I had just transferred the
It's
numbers.
okay. You caught it quickly, and we all knew by the end of the weekend, before the weekend started, it was S-15.
So are there
Are we
any
looking at
other,
S-15 1.1?
what?
Yes,
1.1? Okay. So make sure I do it.
I have marked in yellow highlight. Well, you'll have your reader headers are in yellow highlight, and then any other text that's highlighted in yellow is a change from what you saw on Friday in response to requests for revisions by the committee.
And the reason it is, the draft was 1.2 and this is 1.1, because this is actually attached to a bill number now, S15. The other one was just a draft. So this is the version 1.1 of S15. Anybody have any questions, comments, concerns?
Would it be helpful for me to point out the
Yeah,
changes
the
that I made?
changes.
Sure.
Yeah, that
It should be pretty
great,
fast.
because I just see
Yep.
sections with different names. That's all so far.
So for the record, Ameren Abergaele Legislative Council, you are looking at draft 1.1 of S15. This is now a strike all that removed all the previous language of S15 and replaced it with all of the elections bill language that you have been looking at in drafting request 21-0081 that you saw last Friday. The headers are highlighted just for ease of reading, but anything that is not highlighted has not changed. So I'm going to scroll down to page page 9. This is in section 6 around early or absentee voting in the town clerk's office. Subdivision C at the bottom of the page, it was pointed out that elsewhere in the bill, it said that boards of civil authority vote about whether to have the vote tabulator available in the clerk's office. So we added that in here, that an individual who is voting in person in the clerk's office will be able to put their ballot into the vote tabulator or ballot box if the Board of Civil Authority has permitted those to be out.
Yep.
So now I'm scrolling down to page 12 on page 34. This language used to say if a voter registers to vote for the first time in Vermont following the mailing to all active voters, and we changed the wording to the time when the Secretary of State's office generated the address file to be used for the mailing of ballots, because that is more accurate than simply saying the mailing.
It's more accurate, but
Okay.
a little less, a little more clunky, but anyway.
Then I'm scrolling down to page 15. The provision of secure ballot drop boxes. In subsection C, drop boxes must allow for the return of ballots by voters at any time of day and must be available for the return of ballots not later than 43 days before. This used to say 45, and for consistency with other provisions in the bill, this has been adjusted to 43 days. Moving down to page 17, there was a discussion on Friday about what if there is not suitable municipal property for the location of a secure drop box, particularly where there's districts. So this sentence has been added to allow that an alternative location may be used with the approval of the Secretary of State's office.
Good.
Scrolling down to on page 19, actually, I did not put a highlight because I just removed something.
So may I just, before we leave
Oh,
that
yes.
section? So really, do we have to go all the way to the Secretary of State's office for that? Couldn't that just be the select board to approve it? I mean, the
No.
location of a drop box? I mean, really, do we have to go all the way to the? It does seem that it's a little.
Will?
I think they have to come to us, Senator Clarkson, for us to purchase the Dropbox for them. So that communication is going to already be happening between our office and those municipalities. And so it would just be in the process of them telling me how many they need, also telling us, hey, this one's not going to be located on municipal property because there isn't any available in this district, and here's where we're going to put it. I thought it was a good idea to have our office just know when that's happening. I also think it's going to be really rare, Senator Clarkson. It only applies to a few towns where this would be the case.
Yeah. No, I can think of a couple actually, and all of us can, I'm sure, think of some in our districts.
Senator Colomar?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm going to agree with Will. I think Senator Clarkson, it also provides a bit of consistency in terms of someone making the decision. And I think if you're going to do that, the only place to do that with a statewide reference is the Secretary of State's office.
I actually think that Will is right. There are going to be very few. And I brought up the example of Brattleboro. I think that there are 3 districts in Brattleboro, but when I think about it, there are municipal owned properties in each of those 3 districts. Because there's a fire station, and there's the town clerk's office, and there's a police station, and I think that there are going to be very few of those instances.
Okay, as long as Will's willing to take them.
I appreciate it.
Okay,
Yes, we are.
Emran?
Down on page 19, this is the section that's dealing with notification of defective ballots. There was discussion about the standard being that a postcard is mailed. And previously there was a subdivision Romanet number 4 that I have removed. That was where it said that clerk shall use reasonable efforts within those 5 days. And per the committee's direction, I have removed that section.
That's the section that said alternatively, they could do something else. Okay,
Yes.
good.
On page 20, 2 changes. The first one, a small one, we added in the phrase "if possible" from a different political party, as that is more consistent with the title as a whole, or the chapter. And then also per the direction of the committee, we added sort of back in that concept of using that a ballot shall be treated as a provisional ballot if a first-time voter who registered by mail or online does not have the proper identification. We included that. And
Senator Clarkson?
So I'm always puzzled a little bit by provisional ballots. I mean, so are they like not included are they held aside? Are they only counted once we've confirmed the identity of somebody? I mean, how are they provisional? I mean, and what if they're the vote that makes the difference? We all know about all the races that are decided by one vote. What does it mean to be a provisional ballot in terms of its integration into the vote count?
Will? Are you with us, Will? I think you just froze.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
We can
you
hear
were
you now,
frozen
but
for a while.
You had frozen.
I'll kill my video because it might help, okay?
Okay.
Oh my gosh, this broadband bill, faster and faster, we need to get it done.
Okay. Will?
Now, can you hear me? Is that better?
Yes, we can hear
Can you
you.
hear me?
Yes.
So I'll try and be quick. Provisional ballot is not included in the count on the night of the election. Then it requires a contact from that clerk to our office the next day to determine whether it will be counted on their official return of votes. And in this case, Senator Clarkson, it would be, has the person submitted their documentation in time to include it in the official count 48 hours later.
So may I just clarify, and forgive me, I know I should know this serving on this committee, but are all same day voter registrants all cast provisional ballots?
No,
No. Okay. Thanks. That I was thinking, oh my God, that is a
No.
huge disadvantage.
yep.
Right.
This is a very small universe of ones that applied online or by mail and didn't include a copy of their identification. With the way you have this bill structured now, with the new system where the ballots are all being reviewed within 72 hours, it's going to even reduce the possibility of these that much further because they're only ones that arrive on election day or the day before and don't have that information.
Great. Thanks.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, moving on.
moving on, the next change is beginning on page 26. I did not highlight all of them, but we added in the word secure to secure ballot box. So there are several of those over the next couple of pages. I did not highlight all of those.
Yep.
Continuing, scrolling down to page 29. This is when a ballot has been deemed effective and the voter has been notified. The voter may cure the defect until the closing of the polls on election day by either, and then you have subdivision A at the bottom of page 28, and then subdivision B on page 29. We added in the phrase, provided the new ballot is received at the clerk's office or at the polling place prior to the closing of the polls, to make it clear that someone can request a new ballot be mailed to them, but that alone does not give them the right to cure their ballot. The new ballot does need to still be received by election day.
Say that again, as long as the old ballot is, say that again.
Certainly. The voter may cure the defect by requesting a new ballot be mailed to them by the clerk, along with materials for submitting the new ballot, but the new ballot still needs to be received at the clerk's office or at the polling place prior to the close of the election.
Why would you put at the clerk's office there? Because many of the polling places aren't at the clerk's office, and we'll have the same problem with them bringing it to the clerk's office at 7 o'clock.
So this doesn't say on election day. We were trying to add the explicit right. So this is for anyone who wants to have their ballot mailed, their replacement ballot mailed to them. It could be in the day. It could be 10 days before the election. It could be the day of the election. If it's the day of the election, then they have to bring it to the polling place. If it's before that. So this is consistent with everything else that's in the rest of the bill.
Got it.
It's so complicated. It's hard to say it succinctly in a way that people will read and understand, but
I got that.
the closest we got. Yeah. All right, moving on. We're going all the way down to page 33, which is the addition of section 20 for a report from the Secretary of State's office. The Secretary of State's office shall consult with municipalities and interested stakeholders on best practices for increasing access to voting for non-English speaking Vermonters and Vermonters with limited English proficiency, and provide recommendations to the Senate and House committees on government operations on or before January 15th, 2022.
Okay.
And those are all of the changes.
Perfect.
Great.
Are you ready for a motion?
I am.
I would move that we adopt S15 draft 1.1 and that we move it out favorably.
No, first we have to.
We have
move
to accept the draft.
To accept the changes to the amendments to S15.
Okay.
As amended.
Yes, because it's a strike all. Right. I would move that we accept the amendments to S15 in the draft. Oh, okay.
That's right. All right. Senator Ram, would you call the roll?
Yes, I was just writing down the draft number. Okay. Senator Collmore,
Yes.
Senator Clarkson.
Yes.
Oops. So I haven't done this in a while. I'm going to put this in the second column area on vote on amendments, where Senator Collmore might not be. Yes. So I will see what I need to do. Senator Collmore. Yes. Senator Clarkson.
Yes.
Senator Polina.
Yes.
Myself. Yes. Senator White, Chairwoman White.
Yes. Gail, did you have a question?
No, I do have a comment though, and that is that the new rules this year for records of action is they request that we do a separate form for each of the iterations of the bill.
Oh, that is
Okay.
so frustrating. I'm
Okay.
sorry. As a former clerk, that makes no sense.
Okay, but we'll do what we're told for today. Okay,
Oh, you're so good.
So
now, does somebody want to move that
Yeah.
we that we report favorably?
I would move that we report favorably S15 in draft 1.1 of
As
S15,
amended.
As amended. It with draft 1.1.
okay, just given that we're doing what we're told, I need to print out a new form. So just give me 1 second while you're voting.
And I'd be glad to restate the motion.
Yes,
So-
I think
sorry.
that you don't have to say draft 1.1 because we've already amended it with draft 1.1.
Right,
Now
so-
we are just reporting favorably.
I would
Okay.
move that we report favorably on S15
As amended.
As amended.
as amended. Thank you. For all the help.
It's our pleasure.
Yeah. You'd think as former clerk, I would remember all that. I just remember, oh, anyway.
So really on this record of action, there's not a lot of, I don't have to put the reporter, et cetera, Gail. I just do that. Just gonna go get the other form.
That would be my understanding.
Okay. They've made it really confusing, frankly, so.
Yeah.
They have, we may have input on this.
Okay. All right. Well, I can fill out the rest as we go, but I can be ready to take the vote now. So this, we don't need to say anything about a draft on this one. This is now as amended.
As amended. Moving out favorably supporting S15 as amended.
I'm ready to take the roll if you are, Madam Chair.
Yes.
Okay. Senator Collmore,
No.
Senator Clarkson,
Yes.
Senator Polina,
Yes.
myself, Senator Rom, yes. Chairwoman White.
Yes.
Okay, and that is a 4-1-0 vote to pass S15 as amended.
Great. Thank you.
And
Unless
our report.
anybody is, excuse me, yes?
And you are going to be our reporter, Senator White?
I was just going to say I would love to report it unless anybody has a burning desire to do so. And in that case,
And even if we did, would we stand in the way of our beloved chair?
if you had a burning desire, I would stand aside.
I have a burning desire to hear you report it.
Yeah. I'm thinking of Johnny Cash on the Senate floor with the burning desire of Senator White.
You mean the Ring of Fire?
And the Ring of Fire, yeah, but I could see us redoing that for
Okay.
burning desire.
All right.
Can I ask a question? There is a section for amendment sponsor. Should I put the four of us besides Senator Collmore as amendment sponsor?
No,
Okay.
I don't know why they have that. We as a committee did a strike all.
Mm-hmm.
And so the committee did the strike all.
But
Yeah.
Okay. I don't know. I'm just asking. I'll let John Bloomer yell at us later. Okay.
Yeah.
That's okay. The
Right.
form needs some work. Okay, so you and I can work on this.
Okay. All right. Done. Thank you.
Well done.
And Amron, you did a spectacular job for your very first, very complicated, long bill that started with nothing and ended up in something. So
Thank you.
Is this in fact your first full out the door bill?
No, it is the longest one I've done so far.
Right.
So far. I
And
have
it
some
was
contenders.
and it was
coming
done
up.
in a pretty, could be considered a convoluted way, but so thank you. All right, let's go back to cannabis. Thank you, Will, Chris.
Thanks, committee. Bye-bye.
The connection, of course, is elections.
All right, so Michelle, we've been having a discussion here about the
Hi, Michelle.
opt-in, opt-out provision, and VLCT opposes having well, if we're going to do it, they oppose the language and would like that changed. But they do not support having a drop dead date at all. So we're kind of in the middle of discussing that. And then the other thing that we needed to do was Senator Rom has an amendment, and let's see, at 3 o'clock, are we scheduled to go to the Senator Rom, why don't you talk about your amendment first so we can just get that in the mix.
That would be great. And Madam Chair, I'm supposed to go to Senate Education around 3 after their joint hearing to present something. So appreciate you letting me say that now.
Senator White, so
Yes.
sorry, and maybe this is more confusing. I'm actually in another committee all afternoon. I just popped in because they're on break. I just
Okay,
wanted to see if there's any questions or anything I could help with that might have come up in the earlier discussion. And I'll circle back around with you this afternoon to make sure I catch up on everything that you discussed and see what I could do. So, sorry, I
No,
sorry to
that's
just
great.
pop in and then take off, but they were taking a 10-minute break, so I thought I'd see how it's going over here.
Thank you. Thank you.
But
So, yeah, if we have questions, and I'm not sure if Tucker is going to be with us or not. I think he's also moving back and forth, and it's that time of the year. So thank you.
sure, I will. I'll stay on, and then I'll have Evan email me when judiciary is back, so I can flip over. Okay, thank
Okay.
you.
Thanks. So Senator Rahm, do you want to present to us your amendment?
Sure. And I can work with Gail to have it transferred over to our record, but the language is on judiciary's list of testimony from February 16th, in case that's helpful to anyone. And it has not been introduced, publicly with a bill number or anything. I gave a heads up to Senator Sears. I was interested in this and he asked me to testify. And since then, I have heard feedback from the social justice advocacy groups named in the legislation, and I'll get into that later because they would like to see another sort of grant manager in state government. So the idea of behind this amendment is that it would take, well, I'll start with the big picture. As many folks know and have experienced themselves after the untimely deaths or murders of Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, and George Floyd, a lot of our communities began having really serious conversations about what public safety and policing looks like in the 21st century in a multicultural community, in light of what has been transpiring and what's been happening. Many of those communities have been having those conversations as volunteers without a lot of resources to help guide them when they have come up with needs to, resource people to have that conversation, such as stipends for people to participate in conversations about the future of policing, or to have a professional facilitator, because these conversations can be very emotionally charged. They then are running up against municipalities that are quite depleted from the other pandemic going on, not the racial pandemic, but the health pandemic that we're in. And so, my idea was to start with a number at 20% of the cannabis taxes going to small grants for local government to be able to have meaningful conversations and processes around changes they might like to make of how they engage in policing and public safety in their communities. And that those small grants be distributed via a state entity that works with migrant justice, the NAACP, and the Racial Justice Alliance to help determine what is an eligible application from a municipality. That entity right now that's named in this legislation is the Criminal Justice Council. The advocacy groups would like to see another entity that might be the sort of manager of the funds. And of course, the 20% is very much a starting place. I know that I believe the Senate, from following as a non-senator last year, would rather see that money go to the general fund and be used for general purposes, regardless of, sort of that sentiment from last year. I would just say, I have been talking to many communities, not just in Chittenden County, although I can think of examples like Richmond, Williston, Hartford, Virgins, Rutland, Newport, all over the place. There are individuals who want to have these conversations and they want to center BIPOC residents in their community. But that really takes resources to do that right and not to further harm or deplete BIPOC Vermonters. And really so that officers, stakeholders, civilians can come to the table and have a meaningful conversation. You need resources to do that well. So that's the thrust of the legislation, and I'll be happy to take any questions.
Are there any committee questions? I have some thoughts, but I want to hear from the committee first. Senator Collmore?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So Senator, when you said 20%, what are you thinking the total might be? And what does 20% of that represent exactly?
I believe there's some number in S25. It already says 20%, or it has percentages for revenues up to $10 million or something like that. I mean, if it was, I'm going to say to you now on the record, if it was 5%, I think that would still be a really meaningful amount of money. If it was $100,000 to $2 million, sorry about my dog, these could be very small grants that just supplement these kinds of conversations, help them pay for stipends or interpreters. Even in Burlington, there's been documents released as part of the effort where they have hired someone to go into the police department and start to look at reforms and changes. And when he started coming out with his materials, I said, this is great. Have you interpreted them into other languages? Because, that is a real need to make sure you reach the populations most affected. And, at that time, they didn't have the resources, or they hadn't committed the resources to interpretation. So, it could be very small grants, or it could be a large amount of money. I'm not contemplating, needing more than $2 million for this kind of allocation. So it could be capped at a certain percentage. I know that we're looking at my sense from not being in the legislature for the beginnings of S20 of this conversation was that we're looking at a small amount of revenue at first, potentially to grow much larger. So I'm open to a cap, but I don't think it's a huge amount of money needed to support our communities.
Sorry, I just like to look at the language. It's not posted. Where is it?
I had mentioned it's on Judiciary's page from February 16th. But I'm sorry. I had to work with Gail. I didn't sort of prepare to put it up on our website yet, and I apologize.
No, that's okay. I was trying. Yeah, thank you.
Michelle, did you want to add anything to what I had said about the?
Well, I was just going to clarify for Brian, just the way that it works now is you have the 14% excise tax on the retail sales of cannabis, and then you have the 6% sales tax. The 6% sales tax is designated for after school and summer programming. And then, so you only are using the 14% excise tax on the retail sales. 30% of that excise tax is taken off the top for substance misuse prevention, and that has the cap. The 30% for substance misuse has the $10 million cap. Nothing else has a cap. And then the 70% that's remaining goes into the general fund. And so Senator Rahm's proposal would be that, so you have the 30% going to substance misuse, and then you would have 20% going to what she has designated. And so you would have 50% of the excise tax then going to the general fund. And then last year, JFO did do a lot of, crunching the numbers with kind of a range of what they expect the revenue to come, to be coming in from that excise tax. And I can say, I don't remember exactly what it was, but it's nothing approached $10 million cap. So I'll just say that it wasn't a huge windfall. So.
Thank you, Michelle.
Sure.
Any other questions or?
Yeah, I just want to be clear, Keisha. You said that it would be the community that would be asking for the grant, not an organization. Either the town, the municipality.
Right now it's flexible. I would imagine, I didn't want to presuppose all the sort of parameters that under which someone could submit an application, but I would imagine that a stronger application would be a partnership between a community organization and the town, with one or either submitting with a letter of support from the other. I did not get into that level of detail because I think there's a lot of possible combinations, including in really small towns where the town might not have as much capacity to hold the grant, but maybe they want to have a regional conversation in the Northeast Kingdom through the Northeast Kingdom Collective. So you might not want to say it has to be municipalities.
And right now, the bill, the amendment calls for this happening through the Criminal Justice Council.
Yes, and the advocacy groups who I had helping to make the decision around this wanted a different state entity.
Would they be open to something like the Humanities Council, you think?
I think they're open to a lot of things. I think this was a specific, I just want to make sure I share that, you know, having talked to those groups, that was the one sticking point that they had right away, but otherwise we're really in favor of continuing this conversation because they see the need as well.
Right, thanks.
So I'm going to weigh in here. I actually do not support this amendment or in a form of a bill. First of all, I think that I would have preferred not to specify earmark any of the revenue. I would have preferred to have 14% excise tax, 12% go to the state, and 2% to the towns that are directly impacted by a retail or other establishment. So there is a connection there with what why they're getting it. We did go along with the 30% to prevention and treatment because that's directly related to the issue of substance use and abuse. So we did go along with that, and I did also. This use is not directly related in any way to cannabis. And I fear that what is happening is that I can think of at least 5, suggestions right now from advocacy groups to tap into this new revenue source to earmark it for their particular interest, whether it's this or higher education, after school programs, daycare, subsidizing more reimbursements for parents for daycare. So everybody wants a piece of this revenue. And my position is that it should go to the general fund, and our appropriations committees are the most appropriate to decide where the need is. I don't necessarily disagree with a pot of money that could be used for this, although some of the language in there is troublesome to me, because there's a sentence that says communities that are transitioning away from policing would be getting priority, and I think that is
transitioning funds away from policing.
Well, but I don't know that I have a problem with that, because I don't know that that is the answer in every community. And in some communities where they're actually putting, for example, social workers into their police departments, they might be spending more money by doing that. And so then they would not be eligible. But in any case,
well, they would be eligible. That would be seen as transitioning funds away from policing as a method of public safety.
But it's the police, but it is in the police department. There's a lot of language in here that I think is not clear and would be problematic for me. But my main concern is that I don't think that this money should be earmarked for special needs. So that if the bill was presented in a different way that looked for another source of revenue, I might then I would get into the language of the bill. But as it is, I can't support it. So that's just my 2 cents worth.
Well, if I may, Madam Chair, I would just want to go on record disagreeing that the idea that the war on drugs and the impact of criminalizing possession of marijuana among BIPOC communities is unrelated to the cannabis bill and who's been most impacted by the illegal nature of cannabis in the past, who's been incarcerated, who's been arrested by the police, and now what kinds of conditions they live in that make public safety look very different for them, and what policing means for them look very different. So, I would just respectfully disagree that this is unrelated.
I do see that, but I don't think that this bill, and maybe I don't remember the exact words of it, is aimed only at communities where there are BIPOC populations. So if you had,
That's not.
this is talking about community policing, how the community sees its need for policing. And that really doesn't relate just to BIPOC populations. It's anyway, it does not, it relates, it's every community in Vermont would be.
Well, they would be. The three organizations that would help determine where the money goes are racial justice organizations. And I can't think of a community in Vermont that's untouched by having someone incarcerated or arrested in their community that's BIPOC. I don't, maybe Victory, I'm not sure. But, a majority of towns either have BIPOC residents or have arrests in their community that still might be disproportionate.
Okay. Senator Collimore?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I actually was going to read the actual language, but Senator Rahm might have just answered it. So if you look on page 2 of the proposed amendment, it just does say grants shall be prioritized for communities. Doesn't say any particular kind of community that seek to reduce their police force or transition funding away from policing. So I took your point, Madam Chair, to mean what you thought it did. There's no differentiation between communities in the language, and it isn't just funding, it's actually reducing the police force.
It's either one, but
Okay.
yeah.
So I don't know where we are.
Well,
Community-
it's the first time we've seen it, and so I would suggest we absorb it for a bit. I had thought that there was some move to actually have grants that were went proactively into disproportionately affected BIPOC community in investing in cannabis cultivation and
Yes.
and the opportunity to benefit to reduce the asset gap with our BIPOC community, and actually grants that would go in much, for me, a little bit more productively than this into cannabis operation of some variety, or cannabis retail, or I thought there was a move afoot for that.
If you look at page 5 of S25, there is
That's on
the-
where it is.
the section on social equity, and there is setting up a low interest fund to be available, and judiciary is taking more testimony on that section around setting some parameters around what it means and how it would be administered, because what we've heard is that Massachusetts and I believe it's Illinois and maybe Michigan are used as the kind of gold standard for putting social equity in their bills and in their laws. However, what we've heard is that the implementation of those were abysmal, because while the law was good, the implementation was not. And what they've found is that there are many places where corporations are setting up a woman or a person of color as the owner, but they're just a titular head. They're not really there at all, but they're being named so that they can have access to the funds and to the prioritizations, and that there are places where people who are, shall I say, may have fit into the category of BIPOC or gender minorities have qualified, have gotten the loans or the priorities, but they are in no way have been individually impacted at all. They're wealthy people that are being given grants and interest. So we need to be really careful about setting parameters about what we mean by marginalized and overly impacted, disproportionately impacted communities, so that we don't run into those same implementation. We've heard this from everybody who's done research on cannabis implementation across the country.
So, Senator White, how are those investments financed?
Oh, I think I don't know specifically. They were different in different places. Some of them have just from the general fund set up a fund.
Okay, because I guess my interest is in, could this be the vehicle for funding them?
This amendment?
Well, conceivably. I mean, I'm just thinking of this. The excise tax is the primary form of income that the revenue that the state's going to see out of this. So I guess my question is, in judiciary, have you talked about the funding source for those investments, and might it be a piece of the excise tax? Is that what you're talking?
It might be, but I don't think it's at this point. It isn't specified. It isn't earmarked. It would go to the appropriations committees, and the appropriations committee would say, of this pot of money that we have coming from everywhere, we're going to put this much into this loan fund or this much into this loan fund, and that's a decision they would make, as opposed to us earmarking a percentage. And I feel very strongly that we need to allow the appropriations committees the flexibility to determine when and where money is most appropriately committed, looking at the entire picture instead of us just looking at one section and trying to put money there. Anyway.
So can I just add a couple things?
Mm-hmm.
Senator Clarkson, I don't want my silence to also sort of be complicit in not mentioning that the Racial Justice Alliance has an amendment that they plan to introduce that further supports grants for businesses that are BIPOC owned. I'm sure they've worked a lot on that language, and I support their effort as well. I think what the chairwoman is alluding to, even if there weren't other issues at play, is that might be reparative harm for individuals, perhaps some who have been previously incarcerated because of marijuana or in some way impacted, but maybe others who have not been but still benefit because they're BIPOC, whereas there's been a larger community harm to many of our communities through the over-incarceration of people related to marijuana in the past. So, this is more about the community harm rather than supporting individuals. And again, it has this $10 million cap. So it's a small amount of money should the larger amount of money grow.
So Senator Rahm, if you'd be kind enough to give us, to illustrate how you see because I'm sure you've had an example in your head to illustrate how this might productively help. It almost like restorative justice for a community. I mean, for me, this is like a restorative justice grant. Is that sort of how you're envisioning it? And that a community so could you give us an illustration of how you see this productively affecting and changing a community conversation, or I just like to see how you see this productively applied.
Yeah, well, okay. So, I mean, let's take a community like Virgins, because they had a very public conversation around policing that ended up causing a lot of harm, as folks may or may not have seen in videos that have now gone out nationally. I believe the deputy police chief said something about, is this guy still talking, while a local resident was sharing information about who was being stopped and searched. And we know Virgins is a very major corridor for a lot of people from New York State. And often what people say, and I hear this from law enforcement all the time, right? Because law enforcement needs the trust of the community to do their job well. Law enforcement will say, we need to come to the table equally. It can't be people shouting at us from the streets and saying, we need to change, and we never get to share how we do our work and what it looks like to do our work. And the best way for those entities to come together as equals and sit at the same table and have this conversation is to have the resources to do that well. Number one, if you are appointing a group or you are asking community members to weigh in and to hear out the police and get more engaged in that way, you often need resources just so people have stipends to participate as equals. We've seen public hearings and other things where people can't attend because there's no resources for them to be able to participate in a community conversation. Two, you probably want to have some kind of facilitation to have a strong public process. You want it to be managed, organized, well-maintained. Our, municipalities, when they can, often hire, and consult with organizations to manage their public process so that you can have a really equitable conversation. Finally, you might not pay people, but you might in the future, post-pandemic, want to provide, food, childcare, transportation, other in-person supports. And whether you're providing documents or you're reaching out to people, it may need to be in other languages. So you have a lot of other supports to make sure you have an equitable.
You have translators. I have to admit, I have a little problem with paying people for public and civic engagement. I think that's their responsibility as a citizen to engage. And
well, the benefit might be childcare and a meal if you come to 1 2-hour meeting, or it might be, but you might appoint a small group made up of stakeholders to keep meeting. And as you know from other realms, there are not enough people of color in the state to keep asking them to participate in these processes. And I mean, people ask me all the time in any community, do you know 5 people who live here who we could involve in this? And it's the same 5 people. I mean, I'm doing this right now with Montpelier, and it's hard even for them to come up with a small amount of money.
So can I suggest that a way to get at this, since the applications would come from the municipalities and presumably in concert with a local group, whatever that local group was, or just a group of people who were concerned, that if we in fact gave 2% of that excise tax to the municipalities,
Mm-hmm.
they would then have the resources. They wouldn't have to apply to any place to get the money. They would have some resources to be able to spend on those. So those communities who are interested would be able to use some of that new revenue that is flowing to them for this purpose. It's the same thing.
I favor things that resource our municipalities generally, and agree that, and they are being asked to do more, particularly in this realm, without having the resources of Burlington to say, hey, but Burlington has now said, here's $50,000 to try and have a community conversation around policing. That most municipalities can't do that.
Senator Clarkson.
So I guess I'm just such a Pollyanna, or just not that I'm a Pollyanna, but I'm optimistic that this bill and our work around cannabis and our work indeed in the future around legalizing drugs in this state will help cure this ill and this disparity. And I'm hoping we won't need this forever. And so I would be interested in entertaining this concept at a lower percent for a limited time, because I don't see communities needing this forever. I see communities needing this for the next 5-6 years or whatever. But really, I would want to see communities kickstart this kind of a conversation. I'd love to work on the language. I mean, I'm open to it at a smaller percent with a time limit and with more direction, I think, in terms of helping communities envision how they could use it, particularly communities that you might not think about.
Why would you not just let them share in the revenue and then spend it?
I would prefer that. I am absolutely support your
I'm with
belief
that too.
that the communities should have 2% of the excise tax, but municipalities.
You're not getting disagreement from me on that.
No.
There's a specific proposal on the table. I support that.
No, I agree with that. And then the communities could spend it as they saw fit.
And if we had that, I would think that we could add language about what we would hope they might some of the things we might consider they might spend on. But I would absolutely support the 2% excise tax to municipalities that host these establishments. But to Keisha's amendment, okay. I think it could do with a little bit of work, and I would limit it in time, and I would limit it in percent. But these are just my first thoughts. We've only just seen this, so I think we should sit with it for a little bit.
Yeah, we have it on the agenda. We have cannabis on the agenda again on Thursday. Senator Collimore, did you have?
Yeah, just to your point earlier, Madam Chair, it seems like, you know me with analogies, S25 could be the Christmas tree bill that rather than people adding ornaments to it, people are coming in and grabbing ornaments off it and wanting to take a little piece here and a little piece there until at some point there's not much left at all. And I also support your view that I think the proper role and place for making decisions about that is the Appropriations Committee. And it just seems to make more sense to me.
So let's
may I just say one thing on that,
yes.
Senator White?
Yeah.
You know, we know who our Appropriations Committee is now. You know, I don't always know what the values are with the Appropriations Committee 10 years from now or 20 years from now. I think if you have a value about wanting to right a wrong, you need to articulate how, you know, that and put your money where your mouth is. And I think that, you know, yes, I have faith in our Appropriations Committees also, but I think this is a disparity and a wrong that we can help right in a time frame and with some investment. And it doesn't need to be a large investment, but it kickstarts important healing, restorative justice.
Senator Polina.
Yeah, before you moved on, I know you're ready for another topic, but I've been sitting here pretty quietly listening to all this. I just want to say a few things. Well, first of all, I agree with the 2% for local communities. I think that's a really good idea, and it should have been done that way from the beginning. I don't think there's any guarantee that communities would use it to have a conversation about race and racial discrimination. That's part of the problem with that. I also think that it would be pretty exciting if we could find a way to create a statewide conversation about, you know, racial justice, which sort of stems a little bit off of what Allison was saying about having a time frame and a smaller amount of money, but a time frame. Part of my thinking, though, is that we don't even know when this money will start flowing, do we? I mean,
right. That's right.
Saying, I think we need to do something in the next year or two, not wait 4 years for the money to start building up. So I would be willing for us to consider ways, you know, this committee had something to do with hiring Susanna Davis and the racial justice office. And I think that we could play a role in spurring a conversation about racial justice around the state as well. I'm not sure exactly how yet, but I think it's worth us putting our more thinking into.
Thank you. You know, there's a great advantage to going last. Great.
I think that there is no.
I also think that, I'm not going to interrupt, but I also think it's unfortunate that everybody is trying to glom onto this money from the marijuana sales, from the cannabis sales. Shows how desperate we all are, all the different communities around the state, all different ideas and policy groups that all want to glom onto this money when it should just be going into the general fund mostly. But I don't know how we're going to avoid that. Yeah. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, Jeanette.
No, that's okay. I think
You're right.
my deal with that is just, I'm going to resist every attempt to take any of this money other than into the general fund, other than for the municipalities. I know that Senator Baruth really wants it all to go to higher education. I know that people wanted to go to increased childcare. The loan fund for the workforce development. So there's a lot of people who have their eyes on this, and I'm going to, regardless of who it is, I'm going to resist earmarking any of this money for anything except the 30% that's been earmarked for prevention and treatment, and then the making sure that the towns get their share. So
It's hard to avoid it.
I just want to say, watching an industry become legal and profitable and mostly benefit white people when it has led to the misery of so many Black and brown people in this country is very hard to watch. It's very hard to watch for Black and brown people. So it is absolutely an issue that's related to this bill, and I will stand by that.
okay, so we are going to come back, and if and I will say that there's no question that we have to continue to address the racial injustice in the state in many, many forms. So we will continue that conversation in lots of different forms, but and we will come back to this if anybody wants to work on changing some of the wording on this amendment, or what that would be fine. And then we'll come back to the issue of the towns and whether opt in or opt out. And once that decision is made about whether there should be a drop dead date, then we can talk about the language. But it doesn't make sense for us to talk about the language unless we've made a decision about the drop dead date and the vote. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
So is it an appropriate moment for a break?
We can have a 5-minute break, and then we're going to come back and talk about municipal self-governance.
Right. We need to exercise.
Yes. Or we need food. Thank you. Okay, so let's look at our municipal, I don't even know what we could call it, limited, I'm calling it limited self-governance.
You might put pilot in there.
Well, maybe we don't want a pilot. Maybe we just want to increase limited self-governance. Anyway, I know what I'm referring to. So,
yeah, you do.
So I will start the conversation by apologizing in no uncertain terms to anybody that I may have offended the other day when we were talking about this. And I seemed to, I was making what could have been interpreted as a rather snarky comments about some of the areas that we put in that municipalities could not venture into. And I made a rather unkind comment about banking. And I should not have done that. I apologize to the banking community. They are, I love my local banks, and I did not mean any disrespect by what I said. So, given that,
I understand they were listening with interest.
all right, won't make any more snarky comments ever again because we'll get responses like that. Okay, but I do apologize. I did not mean in any way to disparage anyone. Okay, so let's look at this. And I also am apologizing to the committee because I said I would take a stab at rewriting the findings. And I have not had a chance to do that yet, but I promise I will by the end of the week or by the next time we take this up. Okay?
Wow.
Okay.
I'd forgotten that you'd promised to do that. That was a big promise. It's such a crazy time.
I know I have unfortunately made promises beyond my capacity to keep them in this time. And so they're all lagging a little bit behind. Anyway, so let's go. I don't remember exactly where we were.
Are we working off the draft on our?
Yes, and I guess I have some concerns, and I just want to ask Tucker how this would work. If we just said that municipalities were not allowed to adopt or amend ordinances in conflict with US and Vermont constitutions, federal or state law, does that not cover all of these things that we put in there that we very specifically said? Because there are state laws about health insurance and banking and utilities and crimes and criminal procedures.
So this suggestion was actually brought up a few times in the Senate's discussion of S-106 last biennium. And the response is, if the proposals cannot contain anything that is contrary to state law broadly, then they would effectively be barred from proposing anything. Because the entire point of this process is for them to propose some sort of authority that is not already available to them through state law. So Title 24 and then any specific provisions of state law and any of the other titles would be inaccessible to them if they were not allowed to propose something that was inconsistent with state law broadly. So if you were to put in that they were not allowed to propose something that is inconsistent with state law, they would effectively not be able to propose anything unless it is something that state law is completely silent about.
Senator Colmar.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Okay, so how is that different from what's in the bill? There's an enumerated, I think the alphabet goes up to R with things that they can't do. How is what you just said different from what's actually in the bill? Maybe I'm not understanding.
Because if there is anything in state law outside of those enumerated categories, then they would be able to propose them. You know, so for example, it calls out that they shall not propose anything that is inconsistent with state laws regulating alcoholic beverages, except that they may propose to increase municipal fee shares. So
What kinds of things are they likely to propose that are in opposition to state law?
I think if you were to take a look at any of the charter proposals that are coming up this year, I mean, that's what a charter proposal is essentially. It's asking for special permission under a special set of state statutes to have legislative authority. So non-citizen voting in local elections in Montpelier, upcoming at town meeting day. I believe that the city of Burlington is voting on just cause evictions. That is different than what is provided for in Title IX. So, I mean, if you were just to take a look at what's being proposed right now outside of this program, you might get an idea of what inconsistent powers municipalities are asking for.
So I'm looking at the list that Brattleboro gave us last year. On-street parking. Is there a law on the books about on-street parking? Or putting a stop sign on a town road?
I wish that my statutory knowledge was so encyclopedic that I could answer those questions offhand.
It's not. I'm surprised. Karen?
So thank you. There are rules, for instance, if you have a state highway going through
Mhm.
town, then on-street parking, you couldn't just set up your own on-street parking provisions. And there are rules about where stop signs need to be placed, and where speed signs need to be placed. I mean, if you get into AOT, ASHTO signage, there's more rules than you can shake a stick at. But so I'm going to send you sort of the list that we had put together last year, and so you can look at that.
I guess I know that they are unless there's a law that prohibits them from doing it. Is it a state law? Is there a state law right now that says that a town can't put a stop sign on a town street? There might be a rule, but is there a law that says that? Or is there a law that says, let's see, general obligation bonding for a municipal broadband network, that they can't do that? Is there a law that says they can't do that? I mean,
So, am I muted? No.
Yeah,
So,
no.
there's not a law that says, no, absolutely, you can't do those things. But there
Mhm.
are laws that constrain the way you do those things and where you have to get approval from.
But I guess the question I'm asking here is that if somebody said, if some town said in this pilot, we're going to make it a crime to wear red in town on Thursdays, that would have to go through both this commission that's set up and the legislature for approval in what they're doing. So why are we so worried that they're going to be, and if they did want to make that new crime in town in an ordinance and there's a $25 fine for wearing red on Thursdays, do we care? I mean, does the state care? Is my question, I guess. I want to pass this with the least possible categories of exemptions as possible. Yes, Senator Clarkson.
So I have a suggestion. Why don't we flip it around and say, as long as there's no conflict with state law, towns can do what they'd like. I mean, as long as it's not in direct conflict with state law, and then you could get rid of having to exempt all the little individual things and instead make it permissible rather than, you can't do all these 88 things. I mean, why not flip it around and make it, and put the burden on them for finding out if it's illegal, if they can't do it or not.
I think Tucker already answered that question at the beginning.
Oh, I'm sorry. Did he? When?
Yeah, I mean, not exactly. He answered it in a certain kind of way. If you said not in conflict with state law, that would leave us with nothing because everything is in conflict with state law the way things are written.
Be able to do anything.
I mean, we have it we have in state law, we have in Title 17 that they can have 3 select board members or 5, but they can't have 4 or 6, and that they can, and if they have 5, they have to have 1 3-year term and 2 2-year terms. That's state law. We should just butt out of those things. But that is a state law. So if they decided that they wanted to have 4 select
Or
board members.
so when Hartford went to 7, which I think they have now, that was a charter change.
It must have been.
Right. And
Yes.
I mean, like a great example just coming up is like town meeting, right? And like one of the most frustrating things for town meeting is that, you know, it's on a set date and but if you want to move it, you can only move it to these set dates, right? So like we're very prescriptive about how you can move your dates. But if you want to do anything else, maybe weeks later, you have to go through a whole charter process. You can look at things like, you know, Robert Rules of Order being the order, what you have to use to control your town meeting. Why? In this day and age, why? It's complicated, it's convoluted. Why are we saying that it has to be done that way? I mean, there's so many little things that are buried in statute that become really prescriptive that don't make sense. And the problem is when you go in front of not your committee, because you guys are great, but some government operations committee, maybe in a different chamber, that you put proposals through to change these little nuances in state statute. It becomes this huge conversation where it's going to impact every community the same way, regardless of size. And that's why, you know, charters are great because you can kind of like craft it to be what a town needs. But the part of that is that it's set in stone and there's no flexibility there, just the same way any state law is. And so, you know, unless the legislature becomes less prescriptive in how they update statutes and or stay on top of statutes, you know, I mean, if we're going to be a Dillon's Rule state, it makes sense that our parents, our, you know, legislature parents would be on top of our statutory obligations and those sorts of things that we are always having to look back at laws that haven't changed in forever and wonder why are we still in this? And it's always us bringing it before the legislature to update. And sometimes it kicks us, you know, in the backside because the conversations get a little wily and it turns into something, you know, we don't really necessarily want. I mean, I brought it up several times, but bringing up a proposal to deal with blighted properties and communities. And, you know, God forbid a town adopts an ordinance that you know, deals with blighted properties. And, you know, a few years back in the House Government Operations Committee, they were concerned about, well, God forbid a town were to say, you know, you had to cut your grass at a certain inch level. And just because there was that fear of some town somewhere doing it that way, no town was going to be able to get that authority. So I think the bigger question here is like, you have a charter process, which is good, but it's not great. It's not super flexible. It doesn't allow for creativity and ingenuity. It doesn't allow for a lot of flexibility. And the whole idea with this pilot is to put something out there, make everyone feel safe and secure that they're not opening the floodgates, and see where it leads us. And I also, the conversation, what was it, last week or the week before, about, you know, why aren't the Government Operations Committee looking through the lens of how does this charter provision make sense, maybe at a broader scale? Like, why are we just limiting said XYZ charter provision to this one community? Does it make sense to open it to other communities as well? I think that's a great idea. And I think that would be, I don't know how you would legislate that, but it sounds like something that would be really beneficial to all communities, to at least have the legislature, again, who are our parents under our state constitution, look more holistically about these things. And so I'll leave it at that.
So one other example,
Yes,
one
please.
other example is actually a bill that's in the House Transportation Committee right now, and would allow towns to do traffic calming and pedestrian safety on their main streets if their main street, you know, it goes through a village and it's a state highway. Again, the state highway issue, but there are a lot of people very interested in that. And that's coming out of Waitsfield, where somebody was actually killed in the by a crosswalk last year.
So I'm
By
gonna
the
make,
crosswalk or in it?
They were killed in the crosswalk, not by the crosswalk.
Did I say by the crosswalk?
That's
Sorry.
okay. I had a vision of the crosswalk coming up and, doing, and
So-
we've had the same in Woodstock.
so I'm gonna make a couple comments. We in Putney, we tried to get a crosswalk on Route 5 where it goes through the village. And what we were told by transportation is, why would we put a crosswalk there? There's nowhere to go from anywhere else. I mean, which wasn't true, but they couldn't see that people needed to be able to cross the street there. But I'm always blown away by when I start thinking about this, because the way the federal government works is anything that isn't prohibited by the federal government, the states are allowed to do. And if we in Vermont thought that it would be the way we treat our towns is the way the federal government would treat us, we would be up in arms. So we just don't trust our local people. That is the bottom line. And I don't know how to get us there. Senator Colmore?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I agree with you, by the way. I think this whole committee does. We've always tried to craft something that would help our municipalities. I'm curious, back, and I was around at the time, how did Church Street in Burlington get closed? Was that by charter, or was that something that somehow we allowed to happen? And Karen just mentioned some traffic calming situations. Rutland's just done that on a couple of streets that go right through the downtown. I don't remember any charter for Rutland City, so they must have come up with some way to get around whatever regulations they needed to in order to do that. They've built out little, I don't know what you call them, but you can't, there used to be 4 lanes, now it's 2. So it slows the traffic down. How did all that come about? Church Street up in Burlington and the most recent examples in Rutland?
Well, I would have to go back and double check on Church Street, but I believe that was actually they worked with the federal government on that, and there may have been community development entitlement funding or even UDAG funding. I have to go back and check. And then in Rutland, if it's on a local street, they have the city has more authority, and they may also have more authority in their charter than a town that's regulated only by the statutes. But there's a definite difference between a local street and a numbered state highway.
Well, I think in Rutland's case, it was both. Center Street, which is probably a city road, which goes from the top of Route 7 down into the downtown area, was changed. But so was West Street, which in essence is Route 4. And there was a piece of that was changed too. I don't want to get into the weeds here, but I'm just curious. It seems like sometimes it's okay to do it and sometimes it isn't.
It may, if you checked, you may find that it took them a long, long time to do it because they had to work with the Agency of Transportation. Because I know that there was an instance in Brattleboro where they wanted to put a stop sign on a street and it made perfect sense. And everybody who lived there and traveled there and was in Brattleboro knew that there should be a stop sign there. But it took a long, long time because they had to do traffic studies and they had to, Agency of Transportation had to do a lot of stuff. They finally got the stop sign, but took a long time. So where do we go with this committee? Where are we? What should we do? Sarah, Selena?
I'm not sure.
You're supposed to have an
I mean,
answer when you raise your
I know.
hand.
I'm going to say something. I'm going to say something that appears to be negative, but I don't want you to take it negatively because I want to do what we're trying to do. But I'm afraid that we're having a conversation about how to just make the charter changes a little different. But unfortunately, what we have on paper so far makes the charter change process even harder, I think, by making them have those public meetings and go before this commission and the bill and all that kind of stuff. And I wonder if there isn't just another way to look at it, which is to make the charter change process easier, which I think Gwen maybe mentioned or alluded to something like that. Like maybe we're taking it from the wrong point of view. We're sort of saying, instead of charter changes, you can do this bill, what's in this bill. But what's in this bill is a lot like charter changes, only sometimes worse. So maybe instead we should just look at a way to make charter changes more easy.
I just a comment on charter changes. It's on topic, but it's also a little off topic. But which
That's
I
okay.
find
I'm
really,
not sure what I'm talking about anyway.
what I find really interesting, and because usually the charters are going to the House GovOps committee, initially, and it's so interesting to me because it becomes this like. I feel like a lot of the conversation is about the process, right? The making sure that all the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed and the vote was conducted a certain way and the right paperwork went to the Secretary of State and the right this and the right that. And it's like, it becomes, it's more, and then if they don't do it the right way, how valid, was the process because they didn't do it exactly as it's prescribed in, charter and statute. And then, once you get to the substance of the conversation, it's either, some of the, it skates by because it's, there's not a lot of controversy. And then it's kind of the thing where you're like, God, that community just spent a year with this, charter and it was just such an easy fix. And then they never get, again, going back to the, maybe it's if it's good for the goose, good for the gander kind of argument, where if it's that easy for a community, then it should be general law. But if it becomes more of a controversial issue, like the non-citizen voting provision, then they'll have more eyes on it. I don't know how you separate the two, but I agree that the charter process should be easier, but that's still it's not the whole thing, because you're not getting to the issue of having general applicability in law and flexibility in charter. I think I don't know how Karen feels about this, but I think that if there's a way to, have the legislature look through that lens, like I said earlier, about how, yes, it's a charter for the city of Barrie, but maybe it doesn't need to be a charter for the city. Maybe it could just be general law.
We have,
So, go ahead, Karen.
We have over the years proposed legislation that would make the charter change process easier. One of the, and I can dig up all those proposals, but one of them was that a charter change would be on the calendar for so many days, and if fewer than at least 30 House members or 6 senators would have to ask for it to be taken into committee in order for that to happen, and otherwise it would just go through. So there are those kinds of ideas that have been floating around out there. And for some of the more mundane issues, like increasing the size of your select board, nobody would ask for those to go into.
Oh, yeah.
Now, as soon as I say nobody, somebody will,
Yeah.
but theoretically, nobody would be bothered with that.
So maybe it just, when Gwen was talking, it just, maybe we look at general law and just remove all those provisions.
And I, Karen, and you can, I don't hope to stop me if I go too far, but I think that the way the S-106 bill is written, again, we've had time over the last couple of years to put it down and look at it with fresh eyes. If it's going to look like it does now with all those A through M or R or X or whatever letter we're up to for what we can't do, it's more work to comply with it than it's worth. So I would say, unless that's taken out, I don't see the value in moving forward with that as is.
Mm-hmm.
And Karen, you can fire me if you need to. But
Yeah, right. You're fired. No, I would definitely agree. And I think that actually the board agrees. We had that conversation last year at some point at a board meeting. And it would be just a very, very heavy lift for a town to go through this entire process and maybe end up in the same place.
So let's drop S-106 and let's try and figure out how we can give towns what other things we can do that might give them more flexibility. And I will say that we probably won't come up with those before crossover, but we could have I would think, a good discussion about some of the things where we might look at general law and just see if they make sense anymore and just wipe those out. Senator Clarkson?
So if we're going to do that, I would entertain actually hearing from some of our town managers, and I'd devote an hour to hearing from, many, from different range of size towns. I mean, last year we heard from a couple, and really get a sense from them where the barriers are. What are the most irritating sticky points for them? What would they like to see? What would be their ideal in looking at these possibilities and this opportunity? Because what we're really offering is an opportunity for flexibility, simplicity, and more self-governance, and some pilots for self-governance.
Well, we wouldn't even have to do pilots. If we're looking at changing general law, it could just be for everybody who's out there.
So I would suggest we maybe have a public hearing or just an extended committee conversation where not a public hearing. Okay, no public hearing, but invite a range of them. Yeah.
Yes, no, I will pledge that we will spend an entire day at least when we come back looking at what we can do to make it easier for people. And we'll get towns with big towns with administrators, towns with town managers, towns without any, just select boards, and hear from a whole range of people, but no public hearing.
I meant just let's invite them in. And I can think of some very wise, experienced, retired town managers too, like Frank Heald, who, there are quite a few who've thought about these kinds of things and really would have thoughtful contributions on this.
When? And then Senator Polina.
The House Government Operations Committee is taking up the Winooski Charter tomorrow, and Tucker might want to, say something. But their charter has that provision that Karen had brought up about if if a town has a charter provision, they can borrow that charter provision. It's already been, that's already been approved. So I think that'll be a really interesting conversation, and it'll be a good barometer of figuring out where the committee is. And obviously there's the constitutional issues that Tucker had raised. So it'll be interesting to see if they try to accommodate that or if they just don't move forward with it at all. So that I think that'll kind of give us an idea of what our proposal of looking at through the lens of how this applies to everybody, right? How every charter proposal goes through, how warm they are to that idea. Because like we said, it's never your committee, because your committee is at least willing to, just go a little crazy and let go of the reins a little bit, but not so much in the House. So,
Senator Polina, you had a question.
Yeah, actually, two things. I would like to. I hadn't thought about this, but I would like to hear more about the constitutional issues involved in that charter change. Because what do I know? So if Tucker wanted to talk about that for a minute, that'd be good. But I also just have a sort of a question. When we talk about the fact that we're trying to give towns the ability to do things that are not in conflict with state law, I mean, I understand what that means, but do charter changes ever sort of challenge state law? The charter changes are, I mean,
that's what they do.
It's like, I don't know. It's just, this is very confusing, not confusing conversation, but it's just, I'm in a quandary about what to do. Because it seems like what we want to do is have a commission. We have this commission in the bill. I know we're talking about moving away from the bill, but we have a commission in the bill that would just decide to exempt certain towns from state laws and go their own way. I don't know if that makes any sense, but the idea that charter changes represent a change or a challenge to state law by allowing towns to do something different seems to open a door to what we're talking about. But I could be totally wrong. I feel like we're talking in circles.
So I am going to make a suggestion, then I'm going to have Tucker, that we completely move away from S102. We not think about a commission or anything else and that list of things, that we have devote a couple days to hearing from different size communities, differently administered, managed communities, and hear what are the things that bug them the most, the things that they think stand in the way of them being able to address local issues in a creative and flexible manner. And then, so I'm glad I didn't rewrite the findings because that would have been a waste. But anyway, and then we look at the whatever they come up with, the list. And then we look at general law that controls their inability to act creatively and flexibly. And that we look at just deleting those laws. If it's a law that says that they have to have 3 select board members, and lots of towns are saying that's gets in our way, let's just take that off the books. We've done it with other things, but it's taken us 4 or 5 years to come up with them because we can't act quickly enough. So that's my suggestion for kind of a process of moving forward. And everybody can disagree with me if they want, but I'll go to Tucker right now.
So would you like me to talk about some of the charter proposals concerning municipalities being able to access other chartered powers?
Yeah, I think that's what Anthony and Gwen wanted.
So there's a potential spectrum of constitutionality here. So I'll start with the stuff that is likely unconstitutional on its face. And that's any formulation that would allow a charter amendment without action by the General Assembly. Don't panic yet, because we're talking specifically about special laws, special statutes that would need to be amended by the General Assembly. Only the General Assembly can amend those statutes, right? So if the formulation in the charter says that the municipality can amend its charter and statute without coming to the General Assembly, unconstitutional. Now, the concept of granting legislative authority to a municipality that allows them to access existing chartered powers for other municipalities may be constitutional. That may be a step that could be taken, saying you, Winooski, whoever, may adopt an ordinance based on existing statute, which includes Title 24 Appendix, the charters that are out there. That may be constitutional, but you're also presented with issues of special law in that case. So, for example, if the charter provisions that are granted to the other municipalities say, Town of Brandon, you specifically may open the Town of Brandon Electric Utility Company and provide municipal utility services to residents within your municipality. I think there would be some issues there with allowing another municipality to access those very specific special powers. And of course, the question is always going to be, when you pass this general charter amendment for Winooski or whoever, is it within the will and knowledge of the General Assembly that you're taking into consideration all of this and you're overriding those special laws that are out there? Are we going to have to not withstand certain provisions to make sure that the municipality has general access? I'm not sure. The next constitutional issue comes with granting that general access and then next biennium or next session, passing a charter amendment that is, again, very specific to another municipality. So let's say you pass this general access for Winooski, and then the next session, or let's go to next biennium because it's more clear. Next biennium, new assembly comes back, completely different legislature, unbound by previously passed statutes, comes back and says, okay, Tuckertown, you are allowed to do this. Now that Tuckertown statute is not only more specific, it is later enacted. And it is later enacted by a General Assembly that is completely reconstituted, has new authority, and is unbound by statute. Then we get into a really interesting constitutional conundrum about whether or not that previously passed general provision in Winooski's charter would allow them to access those future specific later enacted powers. However, that may not be your problem. That may be the problem of the municipality that attempts to wield that authority and immediately gets a judicial challenge from an aggrieved citizen.
Okay. Welcome back, Senator Rum. I hope you had a good presentation.
I think it did go well. Thanks. And I want a town named after me too. I'm going to start to pick one.
Well, I'm very
Romville?
interested in having Tuckertown constituted around my property and then getting a charter that says that I can do whatever I want in contravention of state law. It'd be very beneficial for me.
I don't want a town named after me.
But you'd have like a French villa, Jeanette. It would be so cute.
Oh, yeah, right. oh, Jeanette. Okay.
It would be a Norwegian town.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So where are we here with this committee? Senator Rum, while you were gone, we heard from the league that they don't want us to pursue this bill this year because the way with all those restrictions in it, it's more work than it's worth. And it doesn't suit the purpose that we're trying to get to. So what we're thinking about is, and the other committee members have to weigh in because I'm the only one that's suggested this, is that I think this initial suggestion came from Senator Clarkson, that we take a couple days when we come back and hear from towns of different sizes, different geographic locations, different management structures, and listen to them about what are the biggest impediments to them to be able to creatively and flexibly address their local needs. Then we start looking at what those are and trying to figure out how then to approach giving them that flexibility and creativity. Is that kind of what we talked about, committee?
Yep.
Yeah.
So does that make sense to anybody to start looking at that way instead of pursuing this bill that nobody wants anymore?
Yes.
Well, and it's a classic example of only a fool doesn't change their mind, because the league was very supportive of 106 last year. I mean, and they've been thinking about it. And I mean, I think we all were, and I think we're all supportive of giving municipalities more lead, letting them run a little more independently and flexibly and creatively and without such micromanagement.
Yeah, just to add, and I don't, again, not to be super negative, but when going back to that blighted properties, conversation that I had, and Tucker had brought it up last week or the week before, whenever we had talked about this, but under the enumerated ordinance powers under 24 VSA 2291, which is sort of that laundry list of like what towns can do under ordinance under their police powers, health, safety, welfare. It's great to have these conversations, and we'll obviously lean into it and have towns voice their specifics. But they'll have those proposals. Like Springfield will say, we want to be able to address blighted properties in our downtown, and then you're still left with putting a provision that says the town, shall have the ability to adopt an ordinance addressing blighted properties, and then you're still left with that conversation: is do we really? The legislature saying, do we want to be able to let go of that power and trust towns are not going to abuse their police powers to address blighted properties? Every legislative body, every legislature is different in a biennium, so we're hopeful. But part of us dropping the 106 is not because we don't believe in that pilot program, because it worked phenomenally. It worked phenomenally well in West Virginia, which is where we borrowed the idea from. But we understand that if this is the most favorable way of it showing up in the legislature through the Senate, because we know we're going to have the best results in the Senate, it's just going to get worse in the House. It's not going to get better. Normally we would be okay with, working on it harder in the next chamber, but we just know we're not going to get that reception over there.
Well, there are some people in the legislature, both in the Senate and in the House, I believe, who would probably even tighten the reins more. So we'll never convince 180 people, because I firmly believe that there are among us in the 180, a number of people who really believe that we need to have that paternalistic oversight over our towns, because we simply can't trust them. So.
I will.
Yes, Senator Rahm.
Well, I'll add, I shared this proposal with my local government law professor, who's been doing this for a long time. And he said, this seems so exciting, except for all of these, you took out all the fun stuff, So that was his attitude too. Is he always looking for interesting and creative ways to give local government, more opportunity to experiment. And he saw the same thing that word.
Who is that?
His name is Gerald Frug. He's taught local government law at Harvard Law School since 1969, and Barack Obama's taken his class. Murrow Weinberg has taken his class. It's a really valuable class to take for anyone going through that school. I just visited and took the class.
Well, didn't the Kennedy School have cross abilities to take courses at the law school?
Well, right. I just don't. For the record, I was never admitted to Harvard Law School. So
no, but you were part of the Kennedy School, and the Kennedy School enables you to take classes at the law school.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. So let's get, when we have people coming and talking to us, let's get some people who are not necessarily involved in governing a town, but some thinkers like that who are, I was thinking of Frank Bryan. I don't know that he does this anymore at all. Susan Clark. I mean, there are people out there who've been thinking about this for a long time, and who might have some suggestions, and maybe we can become, like West Virginia was a model for us. Maybe we can become a model for some of the other Dillon's states.
Exactly. And we could get Keisha's
professor.
We could get Keisha's professor and somebody from the law school. I don't know if we still have a local government expert, but I think we probably do. But we could you could ask your professor if he'd like to join us.
Well, since you said it a few times, I feel compelled to say he refuses to testify to government bodies because he doesn't like to get involved in conversations like these. He likes to teach people like me to go back out and spread.
Yeah.
That makes sense. So what do you say, committee? Should we go in this direction and see what we can come up with about better creative ways to approach this, and maybe ways that will engender less resistance?
Yes.
Sure.
Or maybe engender more resistance, but are better anyway.
Yeah, and I just have to be reminded at some point about the resistance that we face in the House, because I just remember there was resistance, but I can't remember why there was such resistance.
Well, there were 8 people in the Senate that voted against it.
No, I remember that discussion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
but then
and
it just sat on the wall in the House General, and it didn't move, and it didn't move for a reason.
No, House Gov Ops, not General.
I meant House Gov Ops. You know what I meant to say.
So do you want to, either Gwen or Karen, do you want to?
Well, they actually never even held the conversation in the House Government Operations Committee. They they took up individual charter changes that they wanted to address, and they never even had the conversation otherwise. So we don't have a really good fix on what the reluctance was in that committee. We've got lots of theories, but we never actually got told.
But remember, we're live.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. We never actually got told what the problem was.
Well, I would say that whatever we might come up with, I think that the league needs to do some real bush beating and get people out there to contact their representatives. And it is interesting to me because in the past, when I first came into this legislature, the feeling was that whatever a town clerk said, the House members would do. It was just,
I
they
thought
were
that was
very,
just for one town in
No.
a county in the Southwest.
no, that was the general feeling in this committee at the time, and in a number of issues. And then somehow that changed, and it seems now that there's less trust by House members of local government even than, and I always thought that House members were much closer to their local government and
Well,
would be more trusting and more
Well, a huge percent of them are former select board members. So I have to point out, Madam
maybe
Chair,
that's why they don't trust select board members.
No, I think that I think that may not be the case anymore as we look at the composition of the House shifting a bit. Madam Chair, it's after 4.
Yes.
And,
Oh, I'm sorry.
and I think you and I have to be somewhere else.
I have to be at a chairs meeting.